We bring in Jessica Caldwell. She's a director of industry analysis at Edmunds.com. As you know, it's an automotive website. It was earlier in her career. She worked in product planning for both Subaru and at Mitsubishi. Joins us now from Santa Barbara, California. Jessica, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to continue with the conversation that I was just having with Suzanne. Going back to Ford, no surprise for you that the numbers have come in for Ford as they have for the month of March. But you actually say the bigger story may be General Motors.
Right. I mean, I think we saw about mid-month the strength in some of Ford's sales, especially, I think, as you mentioned, for smaller vehicles, for hybrids. Of course, that goes along with high gas prices. But I think it's interesting when we talk about Ford outselling GM. I mean, GM had a really strong January and February. A lot of that was fueled by incentives. They pulled back a lot in March. They got rid of a lot of programs, and that, I would say, directly affected their sales. So it's almost like they're suffering from a hangover effect from a great time, January and February, and now they're paying for it, and Ford was able to surpass them.
When we're looking at oil prices, near $108 a barrel, 107.97 a barrel for the close today. Obviously, there's going to be an increasing demand for these hybrids, but from what I understand, the research I've been doing into some of the Japanese automakers, therein lies the problem for them right now, because so many of those facilities have not been working at full capacity because of the quake.
Yeah, that's going to be an issue, especially for these hybrids and also for small vehicles, too, because we've seen a big demand in subcompact and compact cars, and sales really soared for those as well in March. So I think it's going to be a growing concern, or it is a growing concern for these Japanese car companies. You do hear reports from Toyota that the Prius factory is fine, the battery plant for the Prius is fine, they're shipping fine. So, you're not sure if you're quite getting the full story, because, there's a lot of, parts that could be affected, but I think we'll really see in April when inventory starts to dwindle to see how these companies really start to react.
Well, do we know whether or not the car companies that especially have their facilities in Japan are following the standard normal ordering schedule? The first week of April for May. Do we know that at this point, and whether or not they're able to do that?
Not quite. I mean, we've already, saw some interesting things in regards to, price hikes that, that could have been pre-planned, don't know. And as far as ordering, is concerned, from what I've seen so far, it seems fairly typical, nothing out of the ordinary. But I think today, when we start to see some of the incentive programs roll in for April, if they're pulled way back, then I think that's a pretty clear sign that there's, an issue with inventory for these vehicles.
Okay, you mentioned earlier General Motors had pulled back on its incentives. What are you expecting to see for General Motors and Ford?
In terms of, well, I think for GM, I think they're gonna, they definitely struggled in March. I'd expect to see somewhat of a conservative incentive spend next month, or I should say this month as well for them. So I think this may be, a few bumpy months ahead of them in terms of overall sales, because again, I think they took a lot of their customers early.
Is it fair to say that we could be in for a few bumpy months in the auto sector, also related to the quake and tsunami in Japan? I mean, it may be aesthetic, but there are some car companies, Chrysler and Ford, that are having issues with some of the pigment, so you may not be able to get the color vehicle you want if you're going to buy a new car. Or, of course, there are some parts facilities that were not online, as we know, because of the quake, and we're now three weeks since the quake.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of, part supplies. But I think the interesting thing about this month was that it started off pretty strong in terms of sales. It started to falter, I think, with some of the, international current events that have been, that have happened through the month. But it started to pick up a little bit at the end. So, so I do feel as if, it's a good sign that there, perhaps consumer confidence isn't as weak as we thought, especially, or it didn't fall apart as we may have initially thought because of everything that has happened. So I think, that's definitely a good sign. So we could see, in terms of some, a little bit of recovery, at least being stable for, for this month and perhaps the next few months as well.
Okay. Jessica Caldwell, Director of Industry Analysis at Edmunds.com. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Same to you.
Sure.